He was trapped on a cliff with a shattered leg. His life nearly over until a veteran appeared and saved him in a way he never imagined. His name was Tom, a 27-year-old hiker who loved to challenge himself by conquering wild cliffs. That day, he set out alone to explore a mountain trail in Utah. The narrow cliffside that was rarely visited because the terrain was dangerous and there was often no phone signal. The beginning of the hike went smoothly. Tom took pictures of the rare scenery from the rocky heights, feeling confident as he walked along the steep path. He had no fear, even though parts of the ground looked fragile. As the sun began to set toward the west, Tom tried to descend a narrow path to capture a more dramatic angle. His steps slipped on a mossy rock. His body crashed down several meters, smashing into a hard rock wall, then wedged into a crevice on the cliff edge. The sound of bones breaking pierced his mind along with unbearable pain. He held his breath, trying to check his leg, which could hardly move. Blood seeped into his pants, soaking through the hiking fabric. Tom reached for his phone, but the screen showed no signal at all. The day slowly turned to dusk. The temperature dropped, cold wind biting against his skin. Tom groaned in pain, struggling to stay conscious even as his vision blurred. He sipped the last of the water in his bottle, then cried out for help over and over, his voice hoarse. In the middle of despair, his mind was filled with terrible thoughts. What if no one passed by? What if night came faster? Fear crept in, making his breathing uneven. Yet in the distance, someone had heard that faint cry. A man in a faded camouflage jacket walked slowly on the mountain path, stopping when he heard a voice carried by the wind. He sharpened his hearing, eyes scanning suspiciously toward the cliff. He was Daniel, a veteran who had just returned from military duty. For the past weeks, Daniel had been hiking to calm his troubled mind. Without hesitation, he decided to check out the sound. Everything was about to change between life and death on a cold and lonely cliff. Daniel took careful steps down the narrow trail, guided only by a dim memory of hearing someone's cry for help. He paused, letting the wind carry the faint echo once again, confirming that it was no illusion. He moved closer, scanning the rock face with trained eyes. The fading sunlight made the cliff look even more treacherous. Daniel's instincts, sharpened by years in the military, picked out a hint of movement far below. He could see a young man wedged against the rock, clutching his leg with a pale, pain-stricken face. Daniel's pulse quickened. This was no ordinary rescue. Tom, barely able to stay conscious, saw a shadow above him. At first, he thought it might be a hallucination, but then he heard a steady, calm voice. "Hang in there," Daniel called out, measuring every word so it would reach Tom without scaring him. The relief in Tom's eyes was clear, though he could barely nod. Daniel analyzed the ground around him, testing the strength of each foothold. The cliffside was steep and broken, with loose stones threatening to crumble at any wrong step. "Listen to me," Daniel continued. "I need you to stay awake. Focus on my voice." Tom tried to answer, but only managed a weak groan. Pain throbbed through every nerve in his leg, making it hard to think clearly. Daniel searched his backpack, pulling out a coil of rope and an old harness. Years of battlefield improvisation had taught him how to turn basic gear into a life-saving tool. Slowly, he inched closer to Tom, speaking all the while, keeping the injured man conscious. "I'm Daniel," he said, voice low and confident. "You're going to make it through this. Trust me." His calm tone steadied Tom's breathing. The dying sunlight painted the cliff in a harsh red glow, reminding them both that night was coming fast. Daniel anchored the rope to a strong tree root, testing it twice, then began to descend further, checking every ledge before putting his weight on it. The cliff did not forgive mistakes. He knew there was no margin for error. A single slip, and both of them would vanish into the darkness below. Daniel's boots gripped the rock, inching lower until he was finally within arm's reach of Tom. The smell of blood and sweat mixed with the cold air around them. Daniel steadied himself on a narrow ledge, looking directly at the young man's pale face. "I'm here," Daniel repeated calmly. "Stay with me?" Tom could barely lift his head, but relief washed over his expression. He had never felt so close to giving up, yet the sight of Daniel brought a thin spark of hope. Daniel scanned Tom's position. The boy was pinned by a wedge of stone, his left leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Daniel knew moving him could cause more damage, but leaving him there was worse. He reached out, checking Tom's pulse with gentle precision, then began inspecting the fracture. "Does this hurt?" Daniel asked quietly, even though he knew the answer. Tom flinched, gasping. "Okay," Daniel nodded. "We'll do this slow. Breathe with me." The veteran's voice, steady and measured, cut through the panic in Tom's mind. Daniel tied a stabilizing splint with a torn cloth and a broken hiking pole, improvising a way he had learned in the field. "You've done this before," Tom whispered with a trembling voice. Daniel gave a brief smile, eyes sharp, never looking away from the boy's injury. "Many times," he answered. A gust of cold wind rattled the cliffside, sending pebbles skipping into the void. Tom's breathing quickened again, terror creeping back as he looked at the drop below. "Don't look down," Daniel reminded him. "Focus on me, on surviving." Tom clenched his jaw, following Daniel's instructions. He could feel the pain tearing through his body, but the sense of purpose helped him hold on. Daniel took a deep breath. He was about to shift Tom's weight, trying to free the pinned leg without letting him slip. One wrong move could mean they both went over the cliff. As he braced himself, night began to swallow the landscape, leaving them in a cold, quiet darkness where every sound felt amplified. He whispered, almost like a prayer, "One chance." Daniel locked his arms around Tom's shoulders, bracing to lift him away from the rock wedge. Every muscle in Daniel's body tensed, calculating the force needed without losing balance. The ledge beneath them felt too narrow, barely holding their combined weight. Daniel knew he had to move quickly, but with absolute control. "Breathe in," he told Tom. "Hold it." Tom gripped Daniel's sleeve, eyes squeezed shut. On a steady count, Daniel shifted Tom's body upward, trying to slide the crushed leg free. Tom let out a raw scream, pain flooding through him like fire. The rock beneath Daniel shifted with a sickening crunch. He froze for a second, feeling the ground give way under one foot. A shower of gravel rattled down the cliffside. Tom started to panic, hyperventilating. Daniel locked eyes with him, voice cold and certain. "Look at me," he commanded. "You're not going to die here." His words struck through Tom's haze of terror. Daniel twisted his hips, pulling Tom toward a slightly wider ledge just half a meter away. Every inch felt like an eternity. Stones rolled off the edge and vanished into the black drop below. With one final push, Daniel planted Tom on the safer ledge. They both collapsed for a moment, breathing hard, sweat dripping despite the freezing night. Daniel checked the splint again, making sure it held. The temperature was still dropping, and their breath turned to fog in the air. Tom could barely keep his eyes open. "Don't sleep," Daniel warned. "Talk to me." "About what?" Tom croaked. "Anything," Daniel said, tying a safety rope around Tom's waist. "You have to stay awake." Daniel's hands were steady, moving fast as he double-knotted the rope, anchoring it to the same tree root he had trusted before. In the darkness, the sounds of the forest changed. Night creatures stirred, and the wind picked up, howling across the cliff like a warning. Daniel swallowed hard, scanning the surroundings. They had survived one deadly moment. But the next challenge was only beginning. Darkness swallowed the mountains, turning the cliffs into a void of shifting shadows. Daniel wiped sweat from his brow, though the night air was freezing. He could hear Tom's breathing, ragged and uneven, fighting to stay conscious. Daniel leaned close, tapping Tom's cheek gently. "Keep talking," he urged. "Stay awake." Tom tried to focus, voice shaking. "My name's Tom," he murmured. 27, photographer. Daniel nodded, keeping Tom engaged. "What do you photograph?" Daniel asked. "Landscapes," Tom whispered. "Wanted to capture the cliffs." Daniel glanced around. The irony cut deep. This place almost killed him for the sake of a photograph. Tom's eyes fluttered, threatening to close. Daniel shook his shoulder firmly. "No sleeping," he repeated. The night wind screamed across the face of the cliff, rattling loose pebbles that scattered into the dark abyss. Daniel checked the knots on the rope again, testing the anchor. He had to make a choice. Staying on this ledge until morning could mean freezing to death, but moving in total darkness was a gamble with death itself. Daniel took stock of what he had. One flare stick, one emergency blanket, a half bottle of water. Not enough. He knew search teams wouldn't be out until daylight. "Listen," Daniel said, voice firm, "I'm going to keep you warm." He wrapped the emergency blanket around Tom, pressing close to share body heat. Tom shivered, teeth chattering. "You've done this before," he mumbled. Daniel nodded once. "Too many times," he answered quietly. Hours crawled by. The cliff felt alive, shifting with each gust of wind. Daniel stayed alert, scanning the darkness, ears tuned for any hint of rescue. Time blurred, measured only by the beating of his heart and the slow rhythm of Tom's shallow breaths. Each minute felt like a lifetime, waiting for dawn. The first faint glow of morning crept across the cliff, painting the rocks in cold shades of gray. Daniel shifted, stiff from holding the same position for hours, but relieved they had survived the night. He checked Tom's pulse, still there, though weak. "You made it," Daniel said softly, almost to himself. Tom's eyes cracked open, bloodshot and puffy, but aware. "You stayed," he croaked. Daniel nodded, giving a small smile. "Never leave a man behind," he answered, as if it were the simplest truth in the world. The sunrise brought no warmth, just enough light to see the full danger of their position. The ledge was tiny, surrounded by sheer drops, and any attempt to climb alone would be suicide. Daniel knew they still needed help. He reached into his pack, pulling out the single flare stick he'd been saving. With careful hands, he checked the fuse. The flare was old, probably expired, but it was their only chance. Tom watched, his face a mixture of fear and hope. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice cracking. Daniel gave a short nod. "No other option," he replied. He struck the flare against the rough side of the rock. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then a sudden burst of red fire blazed alive, hissing and sputtering in the morning air. The harsh glow threw their desperate situation into stark relief. One injured man, one veteran, clinging to a ledge in the middle of nowhere. Daniel held the flare high, waving it in wide arcs. "Someone will see," he told Tom firmly. The smoke curled into the pale sky, a thin red line of hope against the emptiness. Tom closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. Daniel kept waving, refusing to stop, even as the flare burned lower and lower. He would not let this boy die. The last spark of the flare fizzled out, leaving only a dark trail of smoke in the morning breeze. Daniel lowered his arm, muscles trembling from exhaustion. The sky was fully lit now, a pale blue stretching over the endless cliffside. They were painfully visible in daylight, but still terribly alone. Tom coughed weakly, wincing from the pain in his leg. "What if no one saw?" he whispered, voice hoarse. Daniel shook his head. "Someone saw," he insisted. "They have to." He scanned the horizon, searching for any movement, any sound of an approaching helicopter. But the canyon stayed silent, except for the wind whispering along the rocks. Time stretched. Daniel forced Tom to drink a small sip of water, rationing the last drops. "You have to stay hydrated," Daniel ordered, refusing to let Tom fade away. "How long?" Tom asked, barely able to keep his eyes open. "As long as it takes," Daniel replied. A thin, hopeless laugh escaped Tom's lips. "You're crazy," he said. Daniel gave the smallest grin. "Probably," he answered, tightening the harness one more time. He checked the knots again and again, refusing to let his focus slip. In his mind, old battle drills replayed, keeping him steady, telling him that the only way to survive was to stay alert. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning chill. Still nothing. Tom's breathing grew ragged, each gasp a fight. Daniel pressed his hand to Tom's shoulder, grounding him. "I won't let you fall," Daniel promised, voice made of iron. Far off, a low rumble began to grow, so faint Daniel almost thought he imagined it. He turned his head sharply, scanning the sky. The distant echo of rotor blades began to bounce off the cliff walls. Daniel's heart kicked hard in his chest. "They're coming," he whispered. The distant rumble grew louder, turning into the unmistakable chop of helicopter blades. Daniel's entire body went tense, eyes locked on the growing shape in the sky. The search and rescue chopper cut across the canyon, a bright orange flash against the blue. Its searchlight swept across the cliffs, darting from ledge to ledge. Daniel raised both arms, waving wildly. "Here!" he shouted, voice breaking. The helicopter banked toward them, rotor wash kicking up a storm of dust and small stones. The air roared around them, the downforce nearly knocking Daniel off balance. He planted his feet, protecting Tom with his own body as debris pelted them. A voice crackled through a loudspeaker from the chopper. "Hold position. We see you." Daniel nodded, even though they probably couldn't see that from above. He squeezed Tom's shoulder. "They've got us," Daniel said, almost smiling. Tom's eyes filled with tears, unable to speak. The rescue team lowered a paramedic on a cable, swaying in the wind. He landed on the cramped ledge, taking one look at Tom's injuries before giving Daniel a thumbs up. "We'll lift him first," the paramedic shouted over the rotor noise. Daniel helped secure Tom to the harness, steadying him despite the violent gusts of wind. Tom gripped Daniel's hand, terrified. "Don't leave me," Tom pleaded. Daniel leaned close. "I'm right behind you," he promised. The paramedic gave the signal, and the winch began to lift Tom off the ledge. The boy's face twisted with pain and fear, but the harness held, carrying him up toward safety. Daniel watched, every muscle tight, praying nothing would fail. The moment Tom cleared the cliff, Daniel finally allowed himself to exhale, but he knew he still had to get off this deadly rock himself. Daniel watched as Tom was lifted toward the waiting helicopter, the boy's pale face slowly vanishing into the safe interior of the chopper. Relief flooded through Daniel's chest, but he didn't let himself relax yet. The paramedic shouted down from the open door of the helicopter, "Your turn." Daniel shook his head, signaling no. The paramedic hesitated, confused. Daniel pointed down the cliffside, then tapped his chest, as if to say he would handle it on his own. The paramedic looked stunned but nodded, trusting Daniel's choice. The chopper rose higher, pulling away with Tom inside, leaving Daniel alone on the crumbling ledge. He checked his harness one last time, securing every knot with soldier's precision. Then he took a slow, deep breath, letting the cold air steady his focus. There was no reason to burden the rescue team with a second risky lift. Daniel found a safer route along the cliff wall, a path only a trained climber with nerves of steel could even consider. One hand after the other, one foothold after the next, Daniel lowered himself with calm determination, reading the cliff like an old battle map. The sun was fully up now, shining across the rocks and giving him enough light to see every crack and ledge. His muscles burned with fatigue, but the rhythm of survival was locked in his bones. Inch by inch, he descended the dangerous wall, every movement measured, every breath controlled. His mind stayed sharp, replaying countless drills, never allowing fear to drown him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Daniel reached a solid platform at the base of the cliff. He stood there for a moment, letting the weight of what had happened settle into his chest. Then he turned, ready to walk down the last slope of the mountain, alone and silent, just as he had come. Daniel made his way down the final rocky slope, boots steady, mind focused on each step. He felt the ache in his shoulders from carrying Tom, the sting of cuts on his hands, but ignored them. As he reached the bottom of the mountain trail, he saw flashing lights. Rescue vehicles, paramedics, and a small group of hikers had gathered near the landing zone. The helicopter was already on the ground, its engine humming softly. Tom was there, lying on a stretcher with his leg in a splint, wrapped in blankets. His face brightened the moment he spotted Daniel walking toward him. "You made it," Tom called out, voice cracking. Daniel nodded with a quiet smile. The paramedics tried to thank Daniel, but he only gave a brief nod, uninterested in praise. He turned to walk away, ready to disappear back into his quiet life. But Tom grabbed his wrist, stopping him. "Please," Tom said, voice trembling, "don't go." Daniel looked down, surprised. "Why?" he asked softly. "You saved my life," Tom said, tears welling. "I need you to know what that means." Daniel tried to shrug it off, but Tom held on, refusing to let go. "If you hadn't come," Tom continued. I would have died up there. No one else would have heard me. Daniel felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he had buried for years. The crowd around him began to gather, curious about the veteran who had risked everything to save a stranger. One of the rescue team members approached with a small medal in his hand, an emergency services commendation meant for bravery. Sir, the man said, you earned this. Daniel stared at the medal, hesitant. Memories of war flooded him, medals, awards, things he had long stopped caring about. But then he saw Tom's eyes, full of gratitude and respect. Daniel took a deep breath, reached out, and accepted the medal, not for glory, but to remind himself that even after everything, he could still do something good. As the morning sun rose higher, Daniel stood quietly among the rescue team, the weight of his past and present blending into something new. He had saved a life, and in that moment he realized he had also saved himself.